Commission with this item. I thought it was appropriate as this isn't something the city does all the time, although it is not uncommon for the city to incent and develop in a variety of ways. So I thought I'd go through a little bit of some similar projects and then a little bit of an overview of sometimes of how economic development projects manifest. So the first thing it's important to know is that economic development incentives are complex. The city currently uses about 13 different tools. These are tools authorized by state statute, by city ordinance, tools common to pretty much every city, county in the country, if not the region. So I won't go through them all, but the city has, in the last couple years, we've done industrial revenue bond projects. We've done, it's been a while since we've done transportation development district. Community improvement districts, we do those quite often. Tax increment financing, star bonds, and I won't go through them all, but the purpose of me outlining these is the difference a lot of times in the incentives is just when the incentive goes to the developer. So that could mean that a developer on a specific project has a need for an initial incentive, and that's not uncommon for us to do something to front load the incentive, if you will. Sometimes if a development has a loan or a debt that they've issued to do their project, they prefer property tax abatement or sales tax abatement over time, which would then help them with their annual debt obligations. So the next slide sort of really hones in on this, and this is the process that staff goes through before it reaches you. First thing we do is we identify the goal of the project, and it doesn't have to be just one. But among the goals of the project could be blight removal. The city tore down a structure at 3rd and Delaware. We use economic development funds set aside that are from the countywide sales tax. The City Commission sets aside 15% of countywide sales tax funds for economic development and blight removal. So that was a structure in the middle, the heart of our downtown, around a new 3-star hotel, a movie theater that had made a substantial investment, and this was a blighted structure that showed no signs of doing anything, so we removed that. So that is oftentimes one of the goals of the projects. Residential growth, we do residential growth incentive deals. Commercial growth, we do deals residential for job retention and job creation. Luxury and imports or ZEC Ford, those are both job retention, where we don't have somebody new coming in, but we have expansion of existing businesses, so we will do a development incentive agreement with them. Business retention, business creation, and also vibrancy, sales tax growth, complementary uses in areas. That would cover the Cadence development up next door to 2 hotels at 4th and Metropolitan. As we have 2 new hotels and we start looking for the Montessori school, the gas station, those are complementary uses. Corridor management, as we move down specific commercial corridors of the city that we want to see growth. So that's the first step we go through. Then we work with individual developers to identify resource gaps. And I spoke about that just a minute ago, but resource gaps are, where is the need for the developer? Is it upfront capital? Is it long-term reduction of obligations? And that can come through industrial revenue bonds. Price Chopper, for example, we did industrial revenue bonds to eliminate the sales tax they pay on construction materials. That's an upfront benefit that they're able to realize during the construction of their project. So that was a gap that we were able to fill with an industrial revenue project. We open the toolbox after we've identified the resource gaps and we see what applies best. We work with the developer and the city commission, often our city attorney, to determine the correct tools to meet the resource gap in a mutually beneficial manner. Upfront capital needs, as I've mentioned, versus long-term cost needs, infrastructure needs. So this is a good example too. So the city of Leavenworth is constructing about 300 feet of reconstruction of Lakeview Drive for the Culver's project. Now on that project, they do not have any other incentives. There's no property tax abatement, there's no sales tax abatement, but they identified early on that the cost of the improvement of that road was a significant hurdle for them to take the first step in that development, which is a Culver's. So that's the incentive. That money was taken from a dedicated economic development source. That's not road money, that's not sidewalk money, that's not code enforcement or police or fire money. That is money set aside for economic development. So we have the ability to help those developers get into the community and overcome those initial hurdles. And then finally, what we do with the help again of the city attorney, is we created a contractual framework to set expectations, benchmarks, and responsibilities of all parties. Those are often 50-plus page documents. If you see the ZEC redevelopment agreement, that we construct with Cadence for the front Fort Gate development across the street from the fort, and we go through that process so that we're all on the same page with what the expectations are for each project. So just in the last couple years, here are some recent economic development projects with incentives and or development agreements. So this is obviously something, my point with this slide is that we do this often. Northeast redevelopment, Northeast Leavenworth TIF, the downtown hotel TIF, which is the Home 2 Suites, ZEC Ford, Luxury and Imports. We had incentive deals with Benday Lofts, North Broadway Lofts, Abernathy Lofts. The Leavenworth Local is in the neighborhood revitalization area, which is a property tax tool, abatement tool. Price Chopper. I put the Carnegie Arts Loft project on this list because this is somewhat similar to the 600 Cherokee project in that it was city property. We didn't acquire this, but it was deeded to us, that we put out an RFQ, and then we ended up vetting proposals, setting expectations, and then that property was given at the cost of $1.
What property?
That was the Carnegie Art Center that is now the Lofts.
Okay.
Right. So the Hampton Inn, and then we have numerous smaller incentive programs that we do. This is just a few of them: Karma Cakes, First City Cheese Market, Young Sign Company, Z&M Twisted Vine, Straight Edge Barbershop. They all receive networked Kansas e-community loans. It's another tool that the city has to bring economic development. I want to highlight Maps Inc. just for a second. This was a big one for us. This was the first company that we pried out of Johnson County. They came from Lenexa. It's 20 high-paying jobs. They're investing $1.2 million in a new facility in the Gary Carlson Park. And we did industrial revenue bonds. So we did a 60% property tax abatement. That still has to come to the commission, but we're in the contract negotiation part now to help them upfront with their costs. And over since 2019, the city did 27 small business improvement grants in 2019 and 2020, and 10 year-to-date in 2021. That is all done from that annual allocation for economic development that's set aside from the countywide sales tax. We told the public that if you extend this sales tax, that we will invest it in economic development, and we've done so with those grants. Just a quick overview, and I won't go through all these. Often these projects have a combination of incentives and then returns and considerations. It's important to point out 600 Cherokee is in the Neighborhood Revitalization Act, which is a property tax abatement just on the improvements that they make. The city still retains that base property tax amount that they're paying, that is paying right now. And consideration of discounted or free building or property. We also did that with the downtown hotel when the city bought the Knights Inn out of foreclosure. We sold that for far less than we purchased it because the cost even out of foreclosure was beyond what any developer would reasonably pay to have to redevelop that project. For the Northeast Leavenworth TIF, which is the home of 2 3-star Marriott hotels, the city acquired those properties, tore them down, and then moved forward with the development. It's simply the cost was too great for those hotel developers to purchase the property individually, bulldoze them, site grade, and then build. So that's where the city has to jump in and help. Again, these are some of the combinations we use, and this is meant to show you that every single project is considered on its own. We don't have one size fits all. We meet with the developer, we meet with the city attorney, myself, the assistant city manager, and we tailor each incentive proposal to each individual project. So I just highlighted 4 of these different tools that we use. The impact to our resources and the returns and considerations. Industrial revenue bonds is the same as providing upfront either land or a building or even cash incentives. We've given $50,000 a year for CPAC, which is the Consolidated Patient Account Center. It's a VA related facility. That obligation is over now, but we have done that in the past. Both of those are sources, foregoing sales tax and property tax, both are sources that fund basic city services. So that is something the city is giving up. They're just giving it up over time rather than all in one lump sum up front. So let's turn our attention to 600 Cherokee before I get into specifically the item on the agenda tonight. 600 Cherokee. These are a few examples, and we have some videos of the inside. There isn't anybody who's been in that building who doesn't realize that it is on the verge of collapse at some point. The picture on the far left will show essentially a waterfall coming in from the roof in the back as there was holes in the roof and water pouring in as it rained. The middle picture is one of the restrooms with the floor caving in into the basement. And the picture on the right shows the upstairs, and obviously the roof is collapsing and water's getting in and weighing in on the insulation, which is then pushing through the ceiling. A little bit of a summary of 600 Cherokee. For more than 12 years, the building has sat vacant and deteriorated constantly. The asking price of $205,000 has not moved. That was confirmed by developers. It was confirmed by Wendy at Main Street, who had taken many people in there and tried to work with the owner of that building. An out-of-town owner from Lawrence who was not interested in coming down. And the city purchased it, and so we have confirmed that that price was non-negotiable. The rehabilitation cost estimates are all over the place right now, but they range probably from $300,000 to $600,000. And that price makes the purchase and redevelopment financially infeasible for everybody who's looked at it over the last 12 years. The property has access to the NRA, Network Kansas loans, city grants, and yet all of that was not enough to balance the equation. The private sector has concluded over 12 years that this was not a developable project given the cost associated versus the potential revenue created. And I think 12 years is a pretty good amount of time to determine whether the private sector was able to make this a viable project. It is estimated that within 12 to 24 months after having the chief building inspector in there, the city would likely have had to consider court action related to potential demolition, and that would have left that city lot vacant. And getting infill, new building development, and historic downtown would have been extremely difficult, so you would have had a vacant lot there. It was the general consensus that given all of the options available, that this was the only option, the city purchasing this and issuing RFQs for developers that would ensure that the building at some point was put back into use. My final slide on this before I turn it over to the item on the agenda specifically is that we do consider return on investment. We don't just spend economic development dollars to remove blight. You could do that all day and your funds would dwindle. So what do we look at here? For this, the proposed use, and at this point it's just proposed use of a brewery, commercial space, and then 2 residential units. A conservative estimate would indicate that over about 5 years, 5.5 to 6 years, the city could conservatively receive about $40,000 per year in that revenue, which would pay for the purchase price of the building over time. 6 years in economic development, even if it's stretched to 7, is a very quick return. The city has been rebating sales tax to Home Depot for 20 years. And I think everybody would agree that having Home Depot in our community was well worth it. The tax increment financing districts and the CIDs are usually 20 to 22 year processes, so this is a pretty quick turnaround. What's before you tonight is not an agreement. There is nothing in place between the city and Mr. Mann about conditions of an agreement to redevelop 600 Cherokee. There is not a purchase price in place. There is not any talks of other investments by the city or incentives by the city. What you're simply doing tonight, following the presentation at the study session last week, is authorizing city staff to start the negotiation process with the Manns for the rehabilitation of this project. Any development agreement that's reached between the staff and Mr. Mann will come back to the commission and will be subject to transparency, to review. So there is nothing at this point to review. You're simply authorizing myself, Mr. Waters, Mr. Tedder to start negotiations with the Manns on this project.